He eventually becomes a teacher he becomes a literacy teacher, right, at Fletcher Correctional Center. What's so significant about that, becoming a teacher of literature, of English? There's actually a meta quality to that. There's a meta quality to Felix being a literacy teacher because Atwood is being a literacy teacher. Atwood's novel itself is teaching us directly, in many ways, directly about the Tempest. So what I would argue, a couple of good points relating to this point. Felix acts as an agent / voice for Atwood. Atwood speaks vicariously through Felix. Shakespeare was speaking vicariously through Prospero, right? Because it was basically symbolic for him letting go of his control, his magic over theatre. And now Atwood is speaking vicariously and teaching us about the Tempest vicariously. Here's something that I think is really important with the form. If you want to make any point about how he's the teacher and Atwood's teaching us through Felix, then you can talk about the pedagogical style of the novel. Now, when someone talks about pedagogy, that means a method of teaching, because she is trying to educate the reader about the Tempest as Felix tries to educate who? The inmates. So the inmates, we're like the inmates. We're learning about the play. Now, what's significant is that in the process of teaching the inmates, who, by the way, who do the inmates collectively represent? So actually what I would argue is that Caliban as an individual figure, he doesn't really reappear directly, whether it's Eight Hands or whatever. There's no individual who really represents Caliban directly. Or you could make arguments for certain characters, but I think a good argument or a good idea is that Caliban becomes represented by the collective of inmates. The inmates are a collective embodiment of Caliban. So Caliban is no individual. He's represented by all of the prisoners or inmates. So whereas in the Tempest, right, Caliban is represented as what you'd call an other. He's an individual other, right, because he is a native to the land. And this was a time of mass colonization when Shakespeare wrote the play, right? It was called the Age of Discovery. And basically there was a lot of European colonization and they didn't have much respect for the natives who lived on the land that they were colonizing. So Caliban was treated as an other. He is demonized, but he's demonized as, you could say, a racial other, but he's an individual. That tendency to demonize someone who doesn't appear like us for whatever reason. Maybe it's how they think. Maybe it's because they have different political values. Now the inmates kind of represent a larger cohort or collective of people who society treats as different to themselves. So in modern day society, criminals or people who have been in prison are stigmatized and we never perceive them the same way. We see them as that other and we don't actually see them for who they are, but for their past or a mistake they made, for instance, right? By the end, if you remember Hag-Seed, they are doing the performance. They're really immersed in the play. They're getting educated. And I think they've actually got a lot of great ideas at the end about how the Tempest could have ended. If you remember, the novel kind of ends with Felix, the teacher, asking them, how do you think the play could have ended differently? And they're talking about like climate change and all of this stuff, right? So it's kind of humanizing that collective and showing a reformation, right? Or that they're reforming. And so even though Caliban wasn't given that opportunity in the Tempest, the Calibans of the novel are. So Atwood's trying to rectify, or she's trying to respond to the stigmatization of oppressed or subjugated individuals. So basically the other important thing about Felix being a teacher, right, employing that pedagogical style again, we see the prisoners reformed. That's that reformation, right? That curing or healing, if you like, that healing of the prisoners, of the Calibans, actually occurs through the process of learning about the Tempest. So in a very literal way, in that pedagogical way, right? Performance acts as a mode for personal growth. It's a means of personal growth. If you engage with the Tempest, you can learn more about life and you can actually grow as an individual. So there is this intellectual and I would argue spiritual, there is this spiritual merit, this spiritual nourishment that comes from engaging with performance, with the performative mode, with the performative arts. What about that?